I'll just say a few words about myself. I'm a professor of energy and climate change. I'm based at the University of Manchester in the UK, Uppsala in Sweden, and Bergen in Norway. But my job today, well, you won't be hearing much from me, so I'm just chairing today. What we want to do today is to hear from the members of the different citizens' assemblies. So we have members here from 4 of the assemblies, and we're going to hear firsthand from them their views on a number of subjects to give us a flavour of what came out of the citizens' assemblies and how important they can be in driving the political process, or informing and driving it. So we've got people here from 4 assemblies. We've got the French Citizens Assembly, Climate Assembly. I'll use the language of Climate Assembly from now on. We've got from the French Climate Assembly. Now they are probably the most ahead in that they've produced the report. It's been submitted to government, and they've had a response from government. We've got other members here from the Scottish Climate Assembly, which I was involved with as one of the evidence leads on. So we've got people from the Scottish Climate Assembly and the Glaswegian Climate Assembly. They have finished their work and they've put the report in, but they haven't yet had feedback from government. So they're still waiting for a response from government on those. They're due quite soon, I think. And then we've got other members from the Global Climate Assembly, and that work is ongoing. And I think probably I've heard about March for the final report, but they gave an interim contribution at the beginning of this week at the COP to some of the sort of senior people within the COP, and I'll mention that later. So we'll hopefully get some feedback and how people feel that is actually going now. We're sort of this event, not only we're at the forefront of trying to think about climate change, innovative ways to try and inform policy. And if you're listening to most of the negotiations here, we definitely need new ways of informing policy. But we're also, it's a hybrid event, and that in itself, I think, is quite interesting. We wouldn't have had hybrid events just a few years ago, but now with COVID, we've learned these lessons. So we're sort of the guinea pigs for that as well. Hopefully it will work. Citizens' assemblies are really important parts, at least in my view, of sort of participatory democracy. They're taking citizens from society who are not sort of embedded in the political process, and so actually are freer to think more innovatively about the challenges. And so I'm hoping we'll hear some of that today. But as I say, we don't want to hear too much from me, so we're going to go straight over first and just have an introduction from each of the members, just their name, which assembly they were associated with, and if you could just give us one, very briefly, just one reason why you got involved with what are very demanding processes. It's a lot of their time is required to contribute to these citizens' assemblies. So why did you want to get involved and put your time into that? And we'll start off with Nadine. Oh. So we only have one microphone.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Amandine, and I'm from the French Climate Assembly, as you heard. And I would say, first of all, that what made me go into this process was curiosity, because it was very new at the time and I didn't know what to expect, actually. But then it was also duty. And I want to express there the idea that those assemblies are a way to really experience nowadays your citizenship. And that was really strong for me and my other 149 colleagues in this assembly. So it's I feel very lucky today to be there in front of you and to speak about it.
Thanks very much. Next, we're going to hear from Kevin, another Kevin, in Ecuador, and this will be through a translator, and it should be coming up on the screen, hopefully in just a second.
Yo soy Kevin Antonio Moreira y vengo de un hermoso país megadiverso llamado Ecuador. Pertenezco a la Asamblea Global y decidí servir como miembro, ya que me habían contado mis abuelos que antes el clima no era tan cambiante y no era tan rudo los efectos climáticos como ahora. Y por eso yo decidí participar y abrirme a nuevas ideas, a escuchar opiniones diferentes y a poder modificar mi pensamiento. Ya que últimamente en mi región se están dando efectos climáticos muy cambiantes y muy rudos en comparación con los que había con anterioridad.
Good morning. I'm Kevin Antonio Moreno. I come from a beautiful medicine.
Give me one second here. I'm going to try and check with the IT. It's not working. You can translate?
Yeah.
Okay. We've got an impromptu translation here because apparently the translator hasn't arrived.
Okay, so I'm trying to recall everything, but Kevin comes from a very diverse and very nice country called Ecuador. He was explaining that when he was talking to his parents and to all the people in his family, he felt that there was truly an impact on the climate change that he could see in his own diversity in his country. Therefore, he said that it would be an amazing experience to share perspectives from different beings and backgrounds. He was part of the Global Assembly, which involved many countries, and he's very proud to represent Latin America in general. And I think that's amazing.
That's much appreciated. Thanks for that. I'm now going to pass over to Shona.
That's a hard act to follow. I'm Shona from Scotland's Climate Assembly. I've always had a fascination for the environment, and it actually influenced my choice of study after school. I try to minimize my impact on the environment, and I always have done. So I really wanted to take the opportunity to play a bigger part by becoming a part of Scotland's Climate Assembly.
Thanks very much. We're now going to go over to online again, hopefully successful this time, to Tristan, who should be through France.
Yes. I'm Tristan from the French Assembly for Climat, and I accept to participate because it's concern of all of us. Sorry. And we are the cause of this change to the planet, and we must be the solution too. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Tristan. So the next person is Nadine. Oh.
Hi, I'm Nadine. I'm part of the Scottish Climate Assembly, and I got involved mainly because I realised it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I wasn't sure what it would all entail, but I know climate change was becoming increasingly important, and I felt like it was a great chance for me to learn more about it and to get involved in what I can do about it.
Thanks again. And now Francesca.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Francesca Munoz. I am an international student here at University of Glasgow, and I was part of the Glasgow's Citizens Assembly. The main reason I decided to take part in is because I really truly believe that every single one of us inside of a community, no matter what position we are and what social status we have, we take a role in climate change. And therefore, if we have an opportunity like this, like being part of an assembly and being able to express our perspectives and contribute to something better for us and for the future, then I think we should take on it. So for me, it was really a matter of just doing it because I knew it was something that could contribute to something better.
Thanks so much. And now we go to Mary online, hopefully.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Yeah, I'm Mary Nasr from Syria. I'm a member of the Global Assembly, and I'm so happy and lucky to be a part of this organization because the Global Assembly's mission is to give everyone on Earth a seat at the global governance table. It's made up of people across the world representing all the diversity of humanity. There are hundreds of different views trying to make themselves heard. I'm sure we will make a difference. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mary. And finally, but not least.
Hi there, my name is Stevie Anderson. I'm part of the Glasgow Climate Assembly. When I first got the invite to join the Assembly, I was wondering how a small group of select Glasgow citizens could influence policy, or just to get an insight into what the major problems were and how to resolve them. It's a really complicated situation, so I was curious about how I could input into it and how I could join other people to try and resolve or discuss and resolve some of the issues.
That's great. I think that's everyone. Yep. I found that quite humbling because we're hearing about duty and responsibility, which is not something we hear all the time from our policymakers. So already that's a good start, I think, and probably demonstrates how, if we had people like you leading here at the COP, we'd have much more ambitious and realistic sort of targets and policies. So I now want to, hang on, let me take that off for a second. It keeps echoing in my own head when I'm speaking. I now want to ask about some of the recommendations. So start to sort of look within the reports that you've produced and try to understand those recommendations. And I would like each of you here, we'll go around, particularly those initially from Glasgow, France and Scotland, to think about which of the recommendations, if you had to sort of pick one or two out, had the most impact and would, if we adopted it immediately. So which of those recommendations, there's a whole suite of recommendations in all of your reports, which ones would have the most impact if we adopted them immediately? And we'll start off here with Stevie and then Francesca.
Thank you again. When I was looking through the resolutions, the one that kind of stuck out for me was the Glasgow Council resolution that they should expand the financial support to decarbonise the homes. Glasgow's got an old ageing housing stock, so there was, during the debate that we had as an assembly, obviously being mostly Glaswegians that were on the assembly or people from Glasgow, everybody recognises that Glasgow housing stock is aged, it's got all the problems associated with dampness and draft proofing, etc. And it was really interesting to try and feed in and to try and recommend to the council that they try and provide some financial support to resolve some of those issues. And that was basically the main recommendation that I would support.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with Stevie. I would say that for me, the most impactful resolution that we came up with, and I think it was actually the most beneficial one that was brought up in the final session, is that Glasgow and many other cities need to make a roadmap in order to achieve and adapt to a greener economy. We keep talking about economy cycles and talking about how we're going to reduce consumption, waste levels, and put restrictions on private sector and public sector. However, the plan and the right stipulation on how we're going to adapt to it in a specific time period has not been well discussed in all its means. I really believe that our main focus should be in bringing a balance between not only the economical side, not only the social side, but also environmental side. When we're thinking about the solutions, we have to think about what are going to be the consequences and the outcomes of every single one of these propositions we have for our city.
Thanks very much. We'll now go over to France, and we'll go first to Amandine and then over to Tristan online.
No, to give a bit of context about France, just to remind you that the first, emitting sector in France, in domestic emissions in France nowadays is transport. So maybe I would like to raise some proposals that we did on this specific matters. For transport, we wanted to really develop rail networks, but I mean rail networks for people and also for goods, because for people, we have maybe you heard about that. There was a proposal to stop airplane traffic when you have an alternative in train about less than 4 hours. So this was quite one of the striking proposal, and the French government took it in the current law, in the current bill, Climate and Resilience, but passed it not to 4 hours, but to 2 hours and a half. So they stopped the airplane, airplane in domestic travels on that when you have a train alternative. And when I was talking about goods also, was really important for the French Assembly to have massive investment in France to get back on more rail freight, because you got a lot of lines and train that were stopped in France those past few years, and so it was really important to have this massive alternative to aviation. So yes, and in France, just to say, it's 31% of the domestic emissions, and in Europe it's about 25 or 26% also. So just to give you an idea of how would be impactful if we could really implement that fast.
Thank you. That demonstrates, all three of those quite quickly, how the citizens' assemblies, these people come from being members of the general public to becoming experts in as little as 6 months. So I'll go over to both of you now to talk about the Scottish experience.
So one of the ones I feel is very important is to place rail at the core of an integrated transport system by subsidising infrastructure to make it more affordable and resilient than air travel, particularly for mainland journeys within the UK, because we have to reduce how often we fly, and rail is a quick alternative. It doesn't take much longer to get to most places within the UK. If it was cheaper and was more reliable, I think people would use this as an alternative to flying far more often.
It's so difficult to choose just one, actually. They're all so important, but I think it would have to be one of the ones relating to education that I think would have the biggest impact, because we want to try and support behavioural and societal change. I really think that we need to increase and speed up the awareness to make sure everyone understands the climate impact of the actions and the choices that they make. If I had to choose just one, it would be the recommendation that relates to sustainable transport. And my reason for choosing that would be because nearly 40% of Scotland's emissions are actually due to transport, and around 40% of these are from private car use. I read a scary statistic a few years ago for Manchester, actually, that over 250 million car journeys are of less than a kilometre. 250 million car journeys a year are of less than a kilometre. I'm not sure what the stat for Scotland is, but I'm guessing it's probably fairly high. So I think that education can encourage and support the transition from car use to public and active transport, and so help people realise the climate impacts of their travel, and maybe try and encourage them to use public transport more, or to walk, cycle more, especially if their journey is a kilometre or less.
Thanks very much. So we've heard then really about transport, very key, housing, joined up thinking, and education. So they're the sort of key things that I've got from those, and perhaps education for some of our policymakers here would be a good start. So we'll now go over to the global Citizens Assembly, and we'll first start with Mary and then go on to Tristan, and just what they felt the key messages were from the declaration that they gave at the beginning of this week at the COP. So over to you, Mary.
Yeah, I can say that the key message from our declaration is the sustainable future of planet Earth. So our declaration contains 5 points. I will discuss with you 3 of them, and my colleague Kevin will discuss the rest. So first point is the Paris Agreement as a humanities-based chance to avoid dangerous climate change, and its mechanism of implementation. Second point is equity and global justice. Developed countries should assist developing countries in building up autonomous capabilities for climate action. Third point is rights of nature. Ecocide as a crime. We acknowledge that nature has value and rights. Ecocide has to be codified as a crime in international and national laws, and be applicable to governments and corporations. It has to be firmly enforced alongside existing environmental protection laws. Hello.
Sorry, did you have some more to say there, Mary?
I finished my 3 points. I will give the floor to Kevin to discuss the other points.
Thank you. Tristan?
Yes, oui.
Oh, sorry, let me just check that.
Donc, avec Amandine, en fait, on avait décidé de cibler les 2 plus gros postes d'émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Donc, elle avait parlé des transports. Donc, moi, j'ai axé sur le 2e poste, qui est l'agriculture, qui représente 36% des émissions nationales. Et donc voilà, j'ai parlé des mesures qui étaient axées sur l'agroécologie, donc c'est-à-dire une écologie une agriculture plus responsable et plus durable. Et donc dans ce paquet agroécologie, on avait décidé plein de mesures en fait, mais j'ai juste mettre en lumière celles qui sont le plus impactantes pour pas trop non plus prendre de temps. Et donc, celle qui est la plus importante dans le paquet, c'était la fin des engrais azotés. Donc, les engrais azotés, c'est un fléau en fait qui pollue beaucoup l'agriculture depuis pas mal d'années. Et donc, il y a 2 mesures qui concernent ce problème-là. Donc, la première, c'est de taxer, d'augmenter les taxes sur les engrais azotés en augmentant la taxe sur les produits polluants. Et la deuxième mesure, c'était une sortie progressive de ces engrais azotés. Donc, on avait décidé un calendrier de sortie progressive, avec un échéancier pour que d'ici 2040, on en ait fini avec ces engrais azotés. Et donc, voilà, le but, en fait, c'est de transformer l'agriculture. Donc, c'est un gros effort qu'on demande aux agriculteurs en France. Mais donc, si on veut impacter fortement les émissions de gaz à effet de serre, il faut passer par là. Donc, voilà, ce sera tout pour moi.
Thanks so much, Tristan. And as
Welcome.
the more astute of you there will notice that I've already made a slight mistake. We should have gone to Kevin first then. But anyway, thanks very much there for your contribution, Tristan. And Kevin, could we have your thoughts on the declaration, please?
Yo pienso que el mensaje clave de la declaración del COP26 es la importancia que le han brindado a las voces de los ciudadanos, ya que nosotros somos los que estamos sufriendo constantemente las consecuencias del cambio climático día a día. Y es por ello que estamos siendo más conscientes y respetuosos, puesto que conocemos los valores y los derechos intrínsecos que posee la naturaleza. Y no hay que olvidar que muchas veces las mejores soluciones para un problema se originan de las personas que más los están padeciendo.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Oh, okay, great.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
I think the most important message from the declaration of the COP26 is the importance given to the citizen voices, because we are the ones that are suffering the climate change consequences. And because of that, we are being more conscious and respectful, because we recognize the intrinsic values and rights of the nature, without forgetting that sometimes the best solutions come from the people that are suffering this problem.
El segundo punto es que cuando se habla de luchar contra el cambio climático, estamos hablando de un tema de justicia y de derechos humanos, ya que los efectos que genera el cambio climático afectan directamente a muchos de los derechos humanos que son fundamentales.
The second point is that when we are talking about the fight from the climate change, we are talking about fairness. We are talking about the Human Rights Declaration, because these are the problems that we need to solve.
Thanks.
Thanks very much there. Well, what was really clear from both those global contributions was absolutely how key fairness is to addressing climate change. And again, I think it's something that has been increasingly weakened at all of the COPs. If you go right back to the early ones, that particularly the issue of international fairness, but even within countries, it's got weaker and weaker over time. But to those people who are impacted, of course, it's still an absolute key issue for them. But in all of the assemblies, fairness was really important, both in framing the question that the members then had to consider, but also when you look at the recommendations, you can see it reflected in the recommendations as well. But all of the assemblies were like sort of, mini versions of the countries where they were undertaken, and so they're very diverse groups of people within each of the assemblies. So what I'd like to ask really here is in relation to the issue of fairness, how did you tackle that when you had such diverse memberships? And I'll start off with Amadine and then with Tristan.
Maybe I leave the floor first to Tristan, because he was supposed to give the first part of the answer, and I will jump on.
Ok. Donc pour nous, la justice sociale, ça a été un point hyper important dans le processus. Et donc ça a été dans le contrat dès le départ, parce qu'on a bien vu que, en tout cas en France, l'histoire nous a montré qu'à chaque fois qu'on laissait de côté la justice sociale, ça se finissait jamais très bien. Donc là, le plus récent exemple, c'est les Gilets jaunes qui ont lieu il y a 3 ans environ. Et donc voilà, c'est pour ça que dès le départ de la Convention, on a voulu intégrer cette justice sociale dans le processus. Et donc, pour nous, la justice sociale, ça a été de ne laisser de côté personne, parce qu'on n'est pas tous égaux face au changement climatique, et pas tout le monde a les mêmes moyens. Donc, voilà. Donc, la justice sociale, ça a été d'être sûr que tout le monde peut contribuer au changement, même s'il n'a pas forcément beaucoup de moyens. Et donc, voilà, ça a été notre filtre un peu sur lequel toutes nos propositions sont passées, et qui font que, voilà, ils sont les plus justes et les mieux pour tout le monde. Voilà.
So I will go on, and just to give you some examples and concrete examples of proposals that we really sought with the articulation of the impact and at the same time of the respect of this fairness and social justice. So there was a proposal that was really important for the French Assembly, which was the design of a new national food solidarity to enable low-income households to have access to sustainable food. Because, for example, you say it's really important that sustainable food is globalized. I mean, that everybody has access to it, because it's in the path of where we want to go and to be in this fair and resilient world tomorrow. But then you realize that it's not everybody's at access to this and that can afford it. So we have decided to have this supplementary tool, I mean, to help people that cannot afford it nowadays to be helped. And also you have other measures, just to give you examples, like specific ones on renovation for low-income households, because housing renovation was a key proposal of the French Citizen Assembly, but you have to be able to afford it once again. So there was one of the preoccupations. And last one was also to have fair payment for farmers, which is seen in particular in the attention given to tripartite negotiations. So Tristan was saying earlier, like farmers have to commit and to do a lot of efforts to get in the new agri-food system that we want to have, but they also need to be helped financially, I mean.
Thanks very much. And now over to Scotland.
We also felt it was really important to make sure everybody's needs were included in our recommendations, and some of the examples of that were how we chose to recommend the frequent flyer tax on aviation so that opportunities weren't taken away from people on lower incomes and that we could still all have the standard of living that we already do. Other examples of that was how we recommended that people who are currently in carbon offending jobs are supported to retrain in more energy efficient careers.
It was a major part of the recommendations. In fact, it was part of our main question to answer, was including fairness. For me, the diversity of the views of Climate Assembly members was actually one of the aspects I found most rewarding. Listening to the experiences and opinions of others was actually what helped shape my own opinions. It made me more aware of how important it is that to ensure that changes happen, they have to be fair and equitable to everyone. The diverse views also made it clear that for recommendations to be effective, the reasons for those recommendations need to be understood and accepted by as many people as possible.
Thanks very much. And now we'll go over to Ecuador, please, with Kevin.
Al principio abordar las cuestiones de equidad en relación con la acción climática para mí fue algo intimidante, porque como había una gran diversidad de miembros, la verdad es que yo sí estaba algo nervioso, pero ya después con el pasar del tiempo y con la gran acogida por parte de los miembros y el gran apoyo que nos dio el facilitador, se volvió algo muy ameno y sumamente interesante. El opinar y el escuchar los diferentes puntos de vista que hay sobre el cambio climático y las acciones que se deberían hacer para frenarlo.
At the beginning, the approach to equity in relation to climate change was pretty intimidating. I was real nervous because of the diversity of the members of the group, but with the pass of time, the good relationship with the rest of the members and the facilitator support, it became something beautiful and interesting to comment and listen to the actions that must be taken to stop the climate change.
Para finalizar, me gustaría hacer un llamado a los líderes y a los tomadores de decisiones para que ellos se puedan dar cuenta que el cambio climático se da de formas muy distintas en las diferentes partes del mundo y suelen ser los grupos más vulnerables los que más se enfrentan a las mayores consecuencias de este. Y por ello me gustaría recalcar que la equidad es algo fundamental para la humanidad. Y es por ello que los líderes mundiales deberían hacer lo posible para que esta se cumpla y poder llevar a la humanidad por un mejor camino.
I would like to make a call to the leaders of the world and to notice that the climate change effects are very different in many parts of the world, and to see that the equity is very important because there are vulnerable groups that are facing the consequences that the other countries are making.
Thanks very much. And Mary?
Yeah, I would say that during our discussion, we are all agree that fairness is one of the best solutions to address climate change. In our declaration as well, we insist that the voices of most affected people and areas have to be given more space in climate decisions making. We have listened to many witnesses during our discussion who are affected by climate change, how they lost their homes, their lands, and everything. We listened as well to expert Farhana Yamen said, she said, we need to look at who has caused the problem and who is bearing the impact of this problem. We are not in the same boat. So now at COP26, we should be all in the same boat. Now it will no longer be acceptable for countries to use fossil fuel to improve its economic, while people who living in other countries are dying as a result. So really now we need the fairness.
Thanks very much, Mary. And now to Stevie and then Francesca.
Yeah, just picking up what Tristan was saying, I think very quickly on the Glasgow Assembly, we very quickly picked up on that idea of no one gets left behind. And I certainly embraced that because going back to my own history, I was an engineer during the 80s and 90s when traditional engineering kind of collapsed in the UK, and lots of people just made redundant, and we had to retrain, but people have to retrain themselves. Whereas I think the notion of trying to get the government and policymakers to ensure that things are put in place to retrain people for new technologies, whether it's children going through school or whether it's people that are losing their job due to those technological advances that hopefully will solve some of the issues. So the notion of no one gets left behind, and the idea that everybody takes part and everybody takes responsibility for contributing to solving all the issues that the serious issues that we do have nowadays. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree with most of the things that have been said. And I think it's an amazing time to discuss this because COP26, one of the main focuses is actually to talk about different minority groups, talking about poverty or gender equality as well, and how it's involved as an co-effect system with climate change. I think something that we must consider is that the resolutions we make, the propositions we establish in every single one of these conferences, in every single one of these discussions, have to take in consideration the people that are affected the most. In these cases, we are talking about making conferences like this in countries of like the UK, the US, European countries, and yet we forget many of the countries that are most affected are left behind. Many of the countries are not represented enough in this kind of situations. Therefore, the opportunity that we have as citizens to be able to speak in assemblies like this is more than just an opportunity of expression, but it's a necessity for us to be taken in consideration in front and for a perspective to be heard. I think one of the main parts that was discussed in our final resolution, we proposed that the food waste is one of the main issues that is established in the whole world. One of the main economic problems, looking at it from a perspective of business, is that it's not that we don't have enough resources, but it's that our needs and wants are unlimited. And therefore, if we have so much demanding of food that is wasted every single night in Tesco or other supermarkets around the world, then therefore, how can we actually assure that this is served in the right way? One of the solutions that the Glasgow Climate Assembly came up with is that we should take this food, we should take these resources and try to distribute them better through platforms just as Too Good To Go, Olio, and many others that could be designed by the government for the people that at the end of the day are the ones that need it the most.
Thanks very much there. I think a key message that came out there, just to paraphrase you slightly, is that equity is not a nice to have. It's an absolute necessity. It needs to be at the core of thinking about climate change. And you can reflect yourselves as to whether you think equity, both between nations and within nations, is in any way at the core of the discussions that have been had here. I have my views, you will have your views. Maybe they match. So we're now going to touch on three elements of the assemblies, but time has sort of ticked on faster than I would like it to. But I think it was important to sort of extend that sort of issue on fairness. So we really got a grasp of that because it was such a key issue. So we're going to try and touch now on education, land use and homes. And I can ask you all to keep it as succinct as you can because we are quite short of time. So education was a really key element of all of the climate assemblies. And so I want to sort of pull that out a little bit from your various engagements in the assemblies. So we'll start with Amadine to let us know what you thought of the role of education within your climate assembly.
So as you said, it was really central to us, but I will try to give some concrete focus on what we did. And we had this proposal that I think for me is linked to education and information globally, which is the regulation of advertising. We, the French citizens, really asked ourselves about the advertising we receive every day, and the fact that it's not always for virtuous product. I mean, in the way they impact climate. So we decided like not to have an anti-ad radical proposal, which was not the case, but to really use the power of advertising in another way and have it more virtuous, actually. So that was one of the key, tool also, that when you think education, information of the consumer, of the citizen, you can use. And after that, there was also the CO2 score, which is carbon score, actually. And we've been really thinking about this one because it's not only having an impact on what you buy and the way you buy it, but it's really, we also discussed this through the role of the information more generally and more globally, and how a clear information and a well-shared information can be really impactful in the changing of the habit consumer, but also of the industrial producers. It means like you're really at the intersection when touching upon this information subject, that you can have really different key players around this that are obliged in a way to change. And that's why I think information is really interesting. And of course, we had also, more basic proposal about the importance of having professional formation to the future jobs and the transition jobs in housing and recycling, because we're still lacking, I think, of formation in these specific areas will be the jobs of the future. So it was really the idea of considering education and information in every steps of the life of a citizen, from school to, retirement. So that was the way we treated that. We talked about it.
Thanks very much, Shona.
Well, as Amandine said, actually, education and information actually is really important, and that's understating it. As a teacher, it's something I feel very strongly about. It formed a significant part of the discussions we had at Scotland's Climate Assembly. My experience, though, from talking to family, friends, colleagues, as well as young people, is that although the knowledge about climate change is good, generally speaking, like Amandine was saying, I just don't see much of this knowledge translating into changed behaviours or attitudes. So for me, the thing is to provide education and information on the actions and choices individuals can make that will help in the fight against climate change. How Bad Are Bananas? The book How Bad Are Bananas is a fantastic start point to get an idea of the carbon footprint of things that we buy and things that we do. But that information really needs to be more readily available. And I'll give you an example. Buying seasonally, buying local produced produce, go to the supermarkets to buy tomatoes. So I avoided the ones that were flown in from Morocco because I know that they've got a high carbon footprint. So the British grown ones, what's their carbon footprint? Have they actually been grown in a heated greenhouse? So we don't actually have that information. We can't actually make informed choices about the things that we're doing. And that's where I see education and information having a massive impact.
Thanks very much for that. We're very tight on time, so I hope the others don't mind. I'm going to skip over to the next issue, which is about land use and diet. Again, key issues when it comes to climate change. I'd like to go to Francesca first and talk a little bit about how you embedded issues of land use and indeed diet in your discussions within Glasgow.
Yeah, of course. So I think land use is one of the topics that are talked the least in this kind of discussions. And it's really a shame because historic wise, we can see that land use, as in community gardens, for example, has been seen historically. Just like, for example, in World War II, there were the Victory Gardens that helped when there was a scarcity of resources in the United States. And even nowadays in schools, like in Finland and other countries, they help doing community gardens for the children to learn this kind of skills. This not only has an effect on their diets, but also has a lot of benefits when it comes to the economy and comes with education, and in general to just bring a whole new perspective of how we can create a community that can be bonded together by something better, like it is environmental care. I think something that has to be considered is that this cannot be done completely alone. We always talk about the involvement of the government and the involvement of major organizations. However, we need to consider that as individuals, as citizens, we need to take our part in, and building these community gardens and building other systems that can bring us together to create something better. It's something that is a necessity for many of us.
Thanks so much. And now over to Nadine.
I have a very short word because I completely agree with what you say, and the idea of having different key players and way of changing things. And the citizen is one of them, actually. In France, we had like this reflection, not really on gardens and all that, but more on short local supply chains, which is closed, and low environment costs. But also we had this very macro reflection on how the agri-food system should transit in France and what agroecology should be in France by 2040. So we had this proposal of ensuring 50% of farms committed to agroecology by 2040. And this is also linked to a very strong reflection we had about the common agricultural policy of the European Union, because as you might know, it used to be something very important for the UK, but it's still something very important that is structuring the whole policy of agriculture in France. And it's really, so it's a macro reflection from the very like closed garden and community and thing that you can do by your own to the really massive scale decision that will impact the ecology and agroecology we want for tomorrow. So that was the reflection.
Thanks very much for that. We are very tight on time, but I don't want to just ignore the homes and particularly the adapting to climate change, the Cinderella issue always on climate change. So I just want to touch this as quickly as you could, please, Nadine, and then we'll go over to Tristan.
So the main things we wanted to consider in reference to homes was how we design and build buildings in the future, that they be fit for recycling and reuse, that there be money set aside to help all homeowners and councils retrofit homes by 2030. And we just want in all sorts of planning for retrofitting and for new builds to be considered climate and the effect that the climate could have on these, such as sufficient drainage and being built high enough up to stop flooding, etc.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks for being so brief there. Over to Tristan.
Ouais. Donc, la mesure la plus importante du groupe logement de la Convention, c'était la rénovation. Et donc, dès le début, on a vu qu'il était important aussi de faire des rénovations globales et non partielles, parce qu'on avait rapidement compris en fait que ça ne servait à rien de rénover juste partiellement. Donc, le but, c'était de rénover globalement. Et donc, allié à ça, on avait un système de prêt. Et tu remboursais le prêt sur les économies d'énergie en fait que tu faisais après la rénovation. Donc, on avait construit tout un système en fait qui faisait que les particuliers, enfin tout le monde avait accès à une rénovation plus facilement. Et donc voilà, c'était un des éléments clés. Je ne vais pas être plus rapide.
Thanks so much, Tristan. So we've had a sort of a good set of examples of all of the policy sort of landscape that was considered across the different assemblies. But what I want to try and do now is try and pull out what concrete political impacts either you've witnessed so far or you think will actually come out of the reports you've actually produced. And I recommend people here to actually go and look at the reports. I mean, they're really worthwhile documents. So we'll start with the French Citizens Assembly, because they've already had feedback from government on that. So we'll first go to Tristan and then to Amandine. So Tristan again, please.
Ouais. Donc, le retour qu'on a eu sur le gouvernement, donc il était, enfin, c'était assez mitigé. Sur certaines mesures, on était très contents parce que ça a été appliqué très rapidement. On n'a pas eu trop à attendre. Donc, certaines mesures ont été refusées. Et donc, voilà, d'autres ont été votées au Parlement. Donc, là-dessus, je répondrai enfin voilà, c'est déjà un premier pas, mais je pense qu'on peut aller beaucoup plus loin et faire beaucoup mieux. Donc, j'en dirai pas plus.
Thanks very much. Over to Amandine.
Just to add, I think it's the first time in France you have a public policy that is inspired directly by citizens' work, which is like a first step, of course, but you need to go further. And I just want to speak lastly about the importance of co-constructing, I mean, public policy process, and within with political leaders and ability for the citizens to get on board, and also not only in the discussion, but I mean in the implementation of the measures. And that is the more complicated part, I think, because we've been really in the consultation process and all, and then you create a lot of expectations also from the citizens who take part in this. So it's really now about how you articulate the second chapter of this, and I would leave that question open to you.
Thanks very much there. And now we'll go over to the Global Assembly members, Mary and Kevin, and they gave their declaration to some of the sort of the so-called leading lights here at COP. So it was the First Minister of Scotland, there was the architect of the Paris Agreement was there, and the CEO of United Nations Association, along with others. So over to Mary and then to Kevin, please.
Yeah, I do appreciate what they said about our declaration, and I think it's so great to see the leaders showing their support for Global Assembly's declaration, which focuses on justice, equity, and fairness. Hearing these leaders encourage us to raise our voices and not to lose hope, make us more responsible to go forward and do all the best in our mission. So all agree that the Global Assembly is an effective way to empower people and educate them to be an important part of negotiation on climate change. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And Kev?
Me pareció a mí muy importante que se hayan podido dar unas recomendaciones a nuestras propuestas, ya que esto me hace dar cuenta que así como nosotros los ciudadanos nos estamos tomando en serio el cambio climático, también lo están haciendo los líderes, ya que ellos han estado muy pendientes y nos han corregido de la manera adecuada.
I think it was very important that they could give some recommendations to our proposals, because that makes me realize that as well as the citizens are taking serious this problem, the world leaders are aware to this change to be done.
Okay, thanks so much, Kevin. That's much appreciated. So we're now going to go over to, it looked on my list here, I think over to Glasgow, and that's Francesca and Stevie.
I think what we mostly expect is just actions. The truth is that we keep on talking about what's going to come in a couple years and how urgent this is. However, we don't realize that it's already happening, and it's been happening for many years. We only get into discussions and we have this fancy big ass events, but still there is no actions to be taken, and there is no consequences for those that just sit and watch. I truly believe that when it comes to talking about the future, it is not about only what are our hopes and the goals that we're never going to achieve, but about actually taking in consideration what the citizens are saying, what the people are actually discussing, taking that in account and making something about it. Because if we are going to be speaking about these topics for so many years and still we cannot see a real progress, then it is not worth taking at all.
I think I agree with what everybody's saying. I would hope that not just in Glasgow, but the Scottish Parliament and UK Parliament take on board all the recommendations that all the assemblies are making. And if you look at the impact that the French one's having and the global assemblies are having, I think that feeds back because the UK government's already talking about reducing internal flights and forcing people to use trains more often rather than flights, which I think is great. And I'll just wrap up by saying I think I look forward to in the future when the Assembly's recommendations become conditions. So basically the government have to do it. They don't have to cherry pick the ones that they want to, or the ones that they can manage to do, or the ones that give them the good press.
Thanks very much for that. A very poignant point at the end there. So over to the Scottish Climate Assembly.
So yeah, I hope that our recommendations will be given serious consideration, and like Stevie said, not just the ones that are appealing to the government. After meeting with several cabinet ministers through the course of the Assembly to discuss recommendations, I have to say, feel some of them are very, very enthusiastic and some are much more apprehensive. So I'm excited to see and nervous to see what recommendations they do actually adopt and which ones they give a more careful consideration to.
I also would hope our work will result in actions and to help change the behaviours of individuals, organisations and society. I'd like to think that our recommendations will help to create a new climate-friendly, normal way of life. And I'd say that some changes won't be easy, but we really need to think about the end goal and make those changes anyway. And I would love it if we can attribute our dropping in carbon dioxide levels to COP26, just like Sir David Attenborough proposed. So I've got one question. What change are you going to make today?
Well, what a fantastic way to finish off there. So we've heard, I say, a really good sort of, or got a really good sense of the value of climate assemblies. And I went into being an evidence lead of the Scottish Climate Assembly with a high degree of, I would like to say, healthy skepticism. And I left that process having been completely converted. I now I'm enthusiastic about having climate assemblies, not just to loosely guide policymakers, but to inform them and actually provide quite a concrete direction in terms of, not just in terms of the actual policies themselves, but also the time frame. If you hear the discussions here, if you read the reports, what you see are discussions about what we need to do today, tomorrow, and the next few years out to say 2030. And yet, if you listen to the headline outputs from the great and good here, from the leaders, it's all about net zero by 2050, when most of those people will be dead or retired, or net zero by 2060, or net zero by 2070. That's not what you see when you read these reports. What you see is, what do we do today? And so I think it's really important that the citizens get a much stronger say in trying to guide policy. For those of you that many of you have listened to some of the opening speeches from some of the leaders, I mean, they were, by and large, in my interpretation, they were very vacuous, with a very notable exception of the PM from Barbados. If you've not heard her speech, that is really powerful, and I think captures many of the things that you're discussing here. And I can't help but be left with the feeling that whilst our political leaders play poker with our future, and that's what they're doing here, they're all trying to use their hand to make it better for them and not caring about the prospect of their own citizens. In my view, they're not caring about the prospect of their own citizens in their own countries, let alone those in other countries. But actually, when you listen to the contributions here, I feel that's a much more sort of genuine, authoritative sort of thinking through these issues with deep integrity. And if we're going to resolve climate change, we do require that shift from dangerous playing of poker to real integrity in driving our policies. So on that note, I'd like to thank all of you here for your fantastic contributions, not just today, but more widely in producing the reports, but also all the other people that are not here today that you're representing, who've put in considerable time into the citizens' assemblies, and indeed the various secretariats and so forth that have supported that process, because it's been very demanding for everyone involved. But I think the output has been really worthwhile. So thanks very much to you all. And we're on time. Amazing. First time in my life, that is.